And good evening to all our followers and listeners. Today's Sunday, September 24th at 8:21 p.m. This is Federico Lines of States Rights Radio.
And Seth Hancock of Seth Hancock Reports. And tonight's episode, it's Constitution Week. It's been 234 years, and what have we learned from this document? What is your most important part of our Constitution? This week's been Constitution Week. I think, this is an important document that, of course, that we should all recognize and know. Unfortunately, in America today, that most citizens do not know a whole lot about their Constitution. And I think, even knowing that this is Constitution Week, probably a lot of people associate the Constitution with July 4th, even though that's about the Declaration of Independence, really. And people need to study up on the Constitution, which effectively our king is the Constitution. It isn't any politician. It's the Constitution, which is supposed to govern us. What are your thoughts on just this week?
On this week, yeah, you're right. Many people, when we celebrate the 4th of July, they always bring out the Constitution. That's not really. The 4th of July is independence against Great Britain and its empire. To me, what have I learned from this document? I mean, not many, all my followers and listeners know that I'm a naturalized American citizen. I'm happy to be a naturalized American citizen. And reading up on the country's history and learnings and wisdom from the framers of the Constitution to the heirs to some of the framers and modern day politicians, I learned, quite frankly, that this is a Constitution made by a union of sovereign states compacted into a republic. That's why I'm not in favor of secession. I don't agree with secession. I think, it's not written that, states can secede, but why were the framers going to put something like, you entered this compacted union, but you can leave as well? No, if you're going to be united, you're going to be united, but it's under a union of sovereign states, and you join together. But there's certain powers that belong to the states and not to a central power. And that was the genius of the framers. That was the genius of why they fought a war against an empire, against a centralized power like Great Britain. So to me, it's a very unique compact, a very unique document that no other countries have it. Mexico doesn't have it. United Kingdom doesn't have it. They have a constitution very similar to us, but it's not. So this is a very unique constitution, and people have not seen it through. They don't understand it. They don't see it. They think that it's all high and mighty, the federal government. When they read the Commerce Clause that says Congress has power to regulate, they think, oh, that's it. Congress and federal government has the power. No, it does not. Or immigration, naturalization. They do have, federal government central power does have some powers, but not at all. They just have a few, not all. So what does it mean to me? It's a constitution made by the states, and it's and plain and simple, made by the states. And I really live up to that. That's why I criticize politicians from DeSantis to Trump to Biden to Ted Cruz or Rand Paul, Baby Paul, where they pay homage to a central government and gone back. And it's very disappointing to see many Americans embrace that. As I was telling you, Seth, before the show, I was doing an errand in South Miami, and I see a lot of Cuban Americans with Trump flags and with American flags, and that's fine, but with Trump flags. And I said to myself, they escaped tyranny to embrace Trumpism, to embrace this demagogue like they did in Cuba with Batista and Fidel Castro and past presidents of the country. They really don't understand the meaning of America, and it just makes me so, not frustrated, but annoyed. And that's why we have certain people like that. So Yeah, that's what kind of means to me Constitution Week. How about you, Seth?
Yeah, a lot of same thoughts as you. I think, like I said at the opening, Lex Rex, the Constitution is king, and we need to understand that it's not our politicians. The politicians are demagogues, or they're motivated by selfish political ambition. But the Constitution is supposed to be what governs us, and really, what the Constitution really is it governs the government. It's supposed to say to the federal government and the states that this is your power and authority. And if you read the Constitution, people, the government has little power and authority. Yes, there is some power and authority. I am not an anarchist. We need to have some government, but the government needs to be held in check. And I think the importance of understanding this, really, we've seen it in the last 3 years with the COVID scam, and just how politicians, whether it be Donald Trump as president or your state's governor, they were just issuing rules and edicts from on high with absolutely no legislative oversight over it. I mean, all the state legislators, stayed home. They said, you just obey the governor. And this is an important thing for me from a Christian perspective. One of the things is I saw a lot of churches out there, a lot of pastors would talk about Romans 13, where, it basically tells you that you have to obey government authority, but they kind of pervert and, twist the scripture on that. The reason we need to understand this is, when government officials, like a governor, tells you you must obey me, well, what does the Constitution say? Because the Constitution is king. Not you, governor, not you, president. The Constitution's king. And it's throughout the Constitution you get the idea of what the founders were intending with it, that it wasn't supposed to be this big central planning, central authority. Yeah, we need to understand that the Constitution is supposed to govern the government, and you have no obligation to follow unconstitutional orders from government. When they're constitutional orders, okay, you have to follow it. But if they're unconstitutional, you have the right to stand up. And I know that comes with, let's say a mask mandate. I was opposed to all the mask mandates. If you disobeyed, you might have gone to jail. But you were in the right to disobey, in my opinion, because the governors, the presidents didn't have authority to do this under the Constitution. And so we really need to understand the limits that the Constitution places on government. And that requires education. And, like I said, people, unfortunately, don't know their Constitution.
No, and you know what? That is a great quote. The Constitution is king. That's a good one, Seth. You're right, because we don't want an elected king or queen, but it is the Constitution, and neither is Cotton. Cotton is not king, as they did in the 1850s with the whole pre-Civil War movement. No, the Constitution is king. One thing that I always tell people is that you cannot contradict the Constitution. No matter what you can do, you should never contradict the Constitution, because the Constitution stands above all things. And the same, when they were dictating, passing the fugitive slave law, that's a contradiction to state sovereignty, to state law, that state law trumps federal law. That law it should not even have gone on the books because it's a blatant contradiction to the individual sovereignty of the individual and of the state. And for the federal government to get that power, it's totally a contradiction. Then of course you come with the whole segregation laws. That's a blatant contradiction of the Constitution. I mean, so that's one thing I tell individuals. If you're going to pass a law, you got to make sure that it's not a contradiction to the Constitution, like, for example, commerce or immigration. So that's one thing I always tell individuals out there. And you are absolutely right. And that quote is great. The Constitution is king. Donald Trump is not king, even though people want him to be like a monarch. Joseph Biden is not an emperor. Bill Clinton or FDR was not. FDR was... people treated him like an elected despot, and they kept electing him for 4 terms until they had to initiate the 22nd Amendment, where they had 2 terms and for 4 years. Because if not, then we would have Donald Trump for 3 years, and I don't want that. God forbid Donald Trump for 3 years, or Biden for 3, or Bill Clinton for that matter, or George W. Bush, or Barack Obama. So, we have to know who is the one who controls this, and it's the Constitution. It's set. The rules are there, and we have to follow them. We don't need another constitutional convention, and we can bring that to another topic later on in this segment. We don't need another constitutional convention. We have one. We just have to obey it and know what powers are there for what. And, we just, have to follow it no matter what.
Yeah, like you said, we can't be contradicting the Constitution, and that gets into, like you brought up the Constitutional Convention. We don't need a Constitutional Convention. There are, of course, like you and I have discussed, certain amendments, 16th and 17th come to mind, that we want to get rid of. Which we don't need a constitutional convention for, but those 2 amendments contradict the Constitution themselves. So that's so there are problems with the way politicians have changed and twisted the Constitution. But going back to the founder, the original form of the Constitution. It's a solid document. If we're going to have a government, this is a good one to have. And just about, the fact that, people don't know about the Constitution. I found out this week, an Annenberg, Public Policy Center study. They do a survey every year to see how much Americans know about the Constitution, and a couple of the things they found that only 66%. Okay, so you got a majority, you got 2/3 of Americans who know all 3 branches of government, but it still seems like a small percentage. I mean, that should be something that nearly everybody knows. The 3 branches of government, obviously legislative, executive, and legislative.
And judicial.
Did I say that? So the 3 branches of government, everybody should know these, and 17% of Americans cannot name any of the branches. Then you get to the First Amendment. Only 5% of Americans can name all 5 rights defined in the First Amendment. The freedom of speech. They had 77% of Americans can name freedom of speech, which is, a nice, healthy majority. But beyond that, it's all less than half can name the other rights. So 40% can name freedom of religion, 33% can name the right to assemble, 28% can name the freedom of the press, and 9% can name the right to petition the government. and then combined, only 5% can name all five. That's a problem. People need to study the Constitution, and unfortunately, we have an education system that's not very interested in studying it.
No, you're right, and not many people know all the amendments, all our Bill of Rights. A majority of Americans don't even know what the Second Amendment entails. I mean, they do, but again, they follow the every time of gun safety or the anti-gun law, the anti-gun lobbyists and the anti-gun organizations. So I don't think they really know the true definition, not definition, but wording of the Second Amendment. And they just think, oh my God, it's another school shooting. Yeah, we got to ban guns. We got to do this. We got to ban bump stocks. Thank you, Donald Trump, for that. Not many people know the Third Amendment. The fourth that you and I have spoken about. Many people still are not aware of our Fourth Amendment rights. And so on. And even the Ninth Amendment that goes before the 10th Amendment, which is the rights of the states. But before the 10th Amendment, you get the Ninth, which is the rights of the individuals. If Roe versus Wade if Roe versus Wade on the abortion issue would have challenged the Ninth Amendment as a violation, I think would have been differently than just done it on the 14th Amendment. I think they would have said that it's an individual right and not a due process right. Like they did with Griswold versus Connecticut, contraception, using married couples for contraceptive materials. They imply there was a Ninth Amendment challenge, and which rightly so. And the Ninth Amendment comes before the 10th Amendment, the rights of the state. Not many Americans know that because they all are infatuated by this gleamy federal government as a savior to come and save, come and give money, with the usage of the 16th Amendment, print more money to give so they could win more elections. And here comes the 17th Amendment, which I know, Seth, you've said in many segments that those two amendments are the only two that give the central government more power. They give them the power. And it's the first two amendments only. The rest of the amendments don't give the federal government any power. It relies on the states and the individuals. But the 16th and 17th Amendment gives that authority to the federal government. And what do you get out of that? You get spending. You get taxation. You get unrepresented representation. Like now we are seeing Senator Menendez is now indicted for a second time, and people have asked him to resign. Prior to the 17th Amendment, yes, we've had some cases of alleged corruption, non-proven, but we've had cases of alleged corruption, but it's not as bad as today's cases. Today's cases, you've seen unbelievable corruption, unbelievable, people stuffing gold bars in closets and mounts of cash. I mean, what is this? I mean, why? And then you have a convention of states trying to manage that with term limits or a balanced budget amendment. We don't need reform. We need repeal. And those two amendments are the first on the list that should be repealed because they're just terrible. They're awful. But there's your ignorance of the American people that they don't see that. They just see, oh my God, yeah, Bob Menendez is terrible. But then look into the root of the problem. It's you elected this man, and this man is untrustworthy in New Jersey. The same thing with Ted Cruz or Rand Paul or Bernie Sanders or anybody else. So look into the root. Just don't, sugarcoat it with reform. Uncover it with repeal. And people need to understand that those two amendments are just god-awful, and they need to go because it's hurting America. And, we need awareness. And sadly, the education system, and both on the liberal and the conservative, Republican, Democrat, they don't want to change that. And yet we're still mounting with this glorification of leaders for the federal power.
Yeah, and with those two amendments in particular, this is the importance of really understanding the whole Constitution. People need to read the articles that precede the amendments, and there are 7 articles dealing with the legislator, the executive, judiciary of the states, the amendment process, federal powers, and the ratification of the Constitution. People need to know that. Then they need to read the amendments, and they need to, understand what was the point of this Constitution. And when you understand the point of the Constitution, you can see how these two amendments in particular, the 16th and 17th Amendment, completely are antithetical to what the Constitution was about. Like you said, I've said this about the 16th Amendment was the first amendment that gave government rights. And governments don't have rights. Governments have a limited authority, and but they don't have rights. And if people understood the Constitution, if they just educated themselves on why the Constitution was written the way it was, they could see how the 16th Amendment is truly not contradictory to what the Constitution's about. Same with the 17th Amendment. So this is the importance of educating yourself on the whole document and really understanding what government authority there is and what our rights are.
Yeah, and I had this debate with a friend of mine, with another friend of mine, that he was kind of criticizing my quote with Bob Menendez, and then I was saying that the case that launched this 17th Amendment debate was in Montana with William Clark, where they claimed that he was buying off state legislators for his appointment. There was never really any proof to that. There was not really any proof to that alleged corruption. But nowadays, it's just unbelievably, corrupt. And, the thing is that, this is elected by the people. This is why I loathe the popular vote. And that's why I don't believe the popular vote should even exist in presidential elections, because it brings problems. It brings chaos and dismay and anxiety, where you see, candidate A receiving 50% of the vote, candidate B receiving 49% of the vote. I mean, this sense of anxiety and, oh my God, who's going to win? And then we have to go to a second round and a second runoff. And it's not what our framers are. So I don't care what they do in Georgia between Herschel Walker and Raphael Warnock. That's Georgia's election. It should be a joy. Everything is now, what's happening in Georgia? What's happening in Montana? What's happening? I don't care. Why happen when it happens in my state or in your state in Illinois? But I really don't care what happens in Georgia. If it doesn't cross my border, I don't care. And now, of course, in this today's world, with the United States being so heavily involved in world politics, yeah, okay, fine, because that's part of the Constitution. Now, I don't want them to give aid to Ukraine or NATO or whoever, but thanks to George Marshall, we're kind of stuck with it, with the United Nations and with NATO and the Organization of American States and all that. We're kind of stuck with it thanks to George Marshall. But we're kind of inclined to see what's going on. But as far as giving aid, no, I'm opposed to that. I'm opposed to giving aid to foreign countries or even our domestic. I don't think the federal government should be involved in that. For example, like here in Florida, they just opened the Brightline Railway, which is a private company, and yet it received a federal grant for more secured railroad crossings. Why is the federal government giving money to Florida? Why is California tax dollars giving money to Florida and vice versa to California? That's the trouble that I see, that it's who can give the most, and yet the people are saying, it's nice, we're getting money and all that. That's not how it's supposed to be. States are not supposed to be indebted by other states, or we're not supposed to be beholden by the federal government. And sadly, it all started with the fugitive slave law, where, you had southern states beholden to the federal government and giving privilege to those southern states, entering into states like Pennsylvania and trumping on their sovereign rights and, on their anti-slavery laws and all that. And that's not, I curse the day that law was ever passed, because that is not the true meaning of the Constitution or the meaning of America.
Yeah, and like you brought up with the 17th Amendment, it was allegedly created to stop corruption and buying of Senate seats. I'll just note that with the 17th Amendment, we had here in Illinois, my former governor, Rod Blagojevich, who literally sold a Senate seat. So, yeah, the 17th Amendment did not stop that.
No, it did not.
But and people need to understand the different roles. Like you brought up, the popular vote is not really the way we're supposed to have presidents elected. This is the importance of understanding the separation of powers. The Congress, the House of Representatives in particular, is supposed to be the people's voice. So, having a popular election in your House district is the way it should be. Mm-hmm. That's where the people's voice is supposed to be emanating from. The reason the Senate was not supposed to be through popular vote was because they're supposed to represent the state's interests. So, things like Medicare, Medicaid, Social Security, a lot of these things we probably wouldn't even have if we kept the Senate as not elected by the people, but appointed by the state. Because, what's happened with a lot of these programs is that the states are having this financial burden placed on them by the federal government saying the states have to do this, and they don't have a voice to protect themselves because we now let the people vote for the Senate. And then, obviously the executive branch, is supposed to execute what the state, what the House and the Senate are supposed to, come together and eventually write some laws on. But we need to understand the separation of powers, and not only the separation of powers between the legislative, executive, and judicial, but there's also a separation of powers between the federal, state, and local. And we need to understand the different authorities of each of these branches and each of these different levels of government. But unfortunately, as I've said before, I've been covering local government for quite a long time, and I see there being no local control. Everything is top down from the feds, and this is in part because we've lost our understanding of what the government is supposed to do, and that gets back to education.
You mentioned your esteemed former governor, Mr. Rod Blagojevich. What was his nickname that they gave him?
Oh, geez. I forget.
Yeah. No, the 17th Amendment, it's quite interesting. If people have read, as I read, because it's going to be in my second book, in reading one of the sections, it says that the legislature may empower the executive. May empower. I mean, it doesn't say must empower, may empower. So that means that the legislature may not give that power to the governor and may take the power themselves. So, they still have that power, the legislature, to pick their senators, as rightly so. So, if people would just read a moment the grammar situation of the Constitution, whether it's the 16th and 17th Amendment that was passed by progressive Republicans, or the framers with the Second Amendment, where you read each comma, each punctuation, and it's not what people think it is. The Second Amendment doesn't say that. It talks about a national militia and the rights of the people should not be denied their rights to bear arms. And national militia means a national military, and yet in order to establish a free republic with a national militia, the rights of the people to bear arms should not be infringed, should not be taken away. So there's your, it's talking about national. It's not talking about a militia. I'm not a member of a militia here. I'm a citizen, which is the rights of the people, but you also have the rights of the military in the free republic. That's what it means. That's what Scalia meant in DC versus Heller. So this idea that Justice McReynolds said in U.S. versus Miller, that he was the first one who brought up that it talks about being a militia of people. No, it's not. It's talking about a militia of a national militia and the rights of the people. And the national militia should not infringe on that right of the people to right to bear arms. People need to read each comma, each punctuation, because if not, then you're going to have a lot of illiterate, ignorant people and, being followed by individuals that want to make you ignorant and illiterate. And that's sad that many people don't read it well, don't read the Constitution well. And with the 17th Amendment, sadly, yes, you're right. I mean, with Blagojevich, he said on the radio that he's not going to give up that seat for anything less than whatever. And that's corruption right there. And and not just him, but senators like that. Even senators that are bringing home the bacon to their state, bringing home funds to their state, that's corruption. That's taking other people's money for your state for whatever benefit is going to be your state. It should not be that case. If Ted Cruz is so interested in protecting the border, then why doesn't he go into his Texas state legislature and tell them, you enforce it, you pass your own law, not helping with federal law, pass your own law. And do that on your own, and you won't have any problem. But when you involve that, then you're going to involve, corruption and privilege, and that's not what the Constitution. It's not privilege under law; it's equality under law, and it goes to all the states. That's why I bring up again the fugitive slave law. That was the first law that actually gave privilege to southern states and some Rocky Mountain states later, but privilege to some states over other states, and that's not what it's supposed to be. There is no privilege in this Constitution. If there was, then we'll be living in a constitution like in Great Britain or in France, where the upper class were the privileged and then you had the lower class. And that's not. This is another meaning of the Constitution. There's no privilege in this Constitution. White privilege, black privilege, whatever. It's all equal under law.
Yeah, and that's kind of the importance of a lot of these issues. We talk about racial issues, and we talk about gender issues. We talk about sexuality issues. All these group things. It always frustrates me because I believe in human rights. I do not believe in group rights. I believe that there are human rights that we all have and that we all should have protected by the government. And, unfortunately, we've become such a tribalist society that everybody's fighting for their group rights instead of their individual rights. Mm-hmm. And that's a problem. And, to go back to the question, we posed at the, in the title of this, what is your most important part of the Constitution? I was kind of thinking about this. We were discussing doing this show this week, and I thought about it, and I think the preamble is the best part of the Constitution to know and understand, because it really lays down the framework of the rest of the Constitution. It tells us exactly why this Constitution is being created. And so the preamble is, we the people of the United States, in order to form a more perfect union, establish justice, ensure domestic tranquility, provide for the common defense, promote the general welfare, and secure the blessings of liberty to ourselves and our prosperity, do ordain and establish this Constitution for the United States of America. So that lays out why that Constitution is being written. And really specifically that ending there, to secure the blessings of liberty to ourselves and our posterity. That, this is why the Constitution was crafted. to secure liberty, and to not only secure liberty for ourselves, but also to our posterity. So, you look at the massive debt that America is in today. We are laying down a burden on future generations that aren't even born yet, for our own selfish reasons today, because we're hoping we don't have to deal with the consequences of going into massive debt. And, future generations who didn't have a voice are going to be the ones that, are going to have to pay for our mistakes today. And that's, we need to start taking accountability for our lives, and that's what liberty is to me. It's where freedom and personal responsibility exist, and that's why I think the preamble might be the best part of the Constitution, in simply giving you an idea of what the Constitution was being written for.
Yeah, the preamble is very important because it shows the initial introduction to the principal document, the Constitution. I would say my important part is the Bill of Rights, because the Bill of Rights is not supposed to show privilege on the law. And that's the whole main purpose of why James Madison was the author of this document, but mostly the author of the First Amendment. Because, back then in the Commonwealth of Virginia, they were still aligned to the Church of England as their religious church. And I believe James Madison was an Episcopalian or another member of another Christian religion. And he said that, the Commonwealth of Virginia was giving privilege to the Church of England and supporting the Church of England in their practice. And I think that James Madison says no, because what about me? What about the Jewish residents in the southern state of Virginia, or Catholics? There were Catholics in Virginia. So I do believe that with that brought out the sense of equality under law. And I think all the Bill of Rights show equality in the law, not privilege in the law. That's why I fight against the injustice of arrest to our members of our minority race citizens, where they are being denied their rights and they're showing unprivileged, they're showing inequality instead of equality. If they did something wrong, then fine, prove it. Just don't take away their rights and, put a knee onto their neck or dropping down like, with their batons, and prove that they did something wrong and show it in court and give them their rights to the equality that is proven to the Bill of Rights. And the Ninth Amendment is more important, is that it shows that some rights are so big that even the state or federal doesn't have it. It's individualism. It's individual rights that have that. So that, to me, and people really need to know, is the Bill of Rights. For example, even corporations. Right now, where Disney's fighting for its right to have a First Amendment right and not being denied their First Amendment right. If they want to complain about DeSantis' law, Don't Say Gay bill, or whatever it's called, they have a right to complain. They have a right to share their grievances, as stated in the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court has said it. That's why I hope that the Supreme Court justices will stay with the First Amendment and will not deny it as they didn't deny it in Citizens United versus FEC. So it's all about equality and not privilege. And then we come up, as you mentioned, Seth, on race relations. Again, we cannot deny our rights to all citizens, white, black, Hispanic, Asian, all of them. They are citizens. And what FDR did in 1942 with the internment camps, that's a violation of all our rights. And then with Trump, with the Muslim ban, you cannot do that. Or John Adams with the French citizens, with the French French Americans, you cannot do that. You're denying their rights to protest. You're denying our Bill of Rights. You're treating them unequal and not with equality. And that's. To me, that's most important, that we are all equal under law and all equal on the eyes of the law. I think Thaddeus Stevens said it right when he was debating the 13th Amendment and later the 14th Amendment, that I don't see equality based only on equality under the law. And then, that's important for everybody. And that's, one thing that I show important.
Yeah, and it's also important to understand that these rights are, they're recognized as rights. They're recognized that they're not given to us by the government. They're recognized that these are rights that we have at birth, inherent in us because we're humans. And it kind of gets into, we've got a lot of illegal people have crossed the border illegally, but we still have to recognize that they have rights that need to be protected, even if they came here illegally. We can't, and that's kind of important, because I just saw a story yesterday that sorry I don't have all the details on it, but I just saw that the police in a town had they had gone to the wrong door in a neighborhood, and they wound up shooting an unarmed man, and they justified it because, well, he was an illegal citizen, so he didn't have rights granted to him from the Constitution. But they kill a guy who, he was here illegally, but they went to the wrong door. They had a warrant for another house, and they knocked at the wrong door, not the house that they had the warrant for. And so they're justifying their actions because he was here illegally. Well, that's that's kind of sick to me. I mean, the police make a massive mistake going to the wrong house and end up killing an innocent man, innocent to the warrant that they were serving. That's just cold-hearted, and we need to recognize that these rights are granted to us because we're human beings. They're not given to us by the Constitution. The Constitution is saying these are the rights that we recognize that you have based on being a human.
Oh yeah, absolutely, and that goes into the Fourth Amendment, where the police don't have the rights. We have the rights, and we have the protection. The police have, of course, we are at a disadvantage because they're the ones with the weapon, and so we have to tread carefully because we may find a trigger-happy police officer that will do something totally sick and disgusting, and like happened in '96 with the African student that he was here legally because he was on a visa, and they shot him. I forgot how many times. These trigger happy cops. That's another thing that just because they're law enforcement figures doesn't mean that they have the power. They don't have the power. They never had. The Fourth Amendment restricts that, and we have the power. So that's why people have to understand. We have the rights, and that's why I think the Bill of Rights is the most important part, is because we hold the rights and the states hold the rights. The federal government doesn't hold the rights. It doesn't say, there's no 11th Amendment saying that, all powers are reserved to the federal government. No, it does not. That's why when I see the federal government take power on commerce or immigration, it sickens me that, or 9/11 with the Patriot Act, it sickens me that we pay, we clap like seals and we're like very happy about it. No, I'm not happy with the TSA or Homeland Security. That's an infringement of our rights, of our First Amendment, Second, Third, Fourth rights. And, people really have to understand that. And, it'll be a long way because, Trump, even though, with the Trump movement, they were all for law enforcement and they were all for the FBI, and it's a great organization, and J. Edgar Hoover, despite his little tutu dresses, but he was a great man. And then all of a sudden they raid his Mar-a-Lago residence. Oh, the FBI is evil. The FBI is bad. Wait a minute. You're the ones that first said the FBI was good, not just because they attacked your hero. You turn the other way. You can't be hypocritical about it. And that's another thing that we could touch base next week, is the hypocrisy of both movements, that it's killing America.
Yeah. And, it's, a lot of that is a creation of the tribal society that we have, that it just creates hypocrisy all around. Everybody's a hypocrite when you listen to, I've said this before, that you can get the same argument from both Democrats and Republicans. They just come at different times and they have a different target. And this is, we need to get back to principles and, being consistent with our beliefs and obviously, we're all humans, so we can change our minds at times, but, we need to recognize it, and we need to recognize when we're making hypocritical arguments and correct that. And, this is, just, something that comes when we've created this central authority. And, the important thing for people today is that they get their guy in power. And I've argued before that I really have an uneasy feeling when we talk about putting people in power. If you're actually in the government, if you're an elected official, you're actually supposed to have very little power. In fact, the power is supposed to rest in the people's hands to be able to run their own lives the way they see fit. And the politicians and the bureaucrats, they're supposed to be public servants. And as far as I'm concerned, servants don't usually have power. And that's a big misunderstanding that both sides can continue to perpetuate, is this idea that there's power in government. Well, no, the power is supposed to be in people's hands, and we need to start exerting that power again as free people in America.
A quick question, Seth. Do you think the president is a bureaucrat, a federal bureaucrat, like the bureaucrats in D.C.? You think he's a bureaucrat?
I would say, in a sense, he is, because he's kind of executing the laws that are passed. But that's the way it should be. I mean, if we got rid of the popular vote, he's now become a popular. I talk about how we do have a king. It's just an elected king. Every 4 years, we elect a new king to be a puppet to the bureaucratic state. But I would say he's supposed to be a bureaucrat.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that's why in some states they got rid of the presidential primaries. And I think it's great. I think we shouldn't even have presidential primaries or caucuses, because it dreams up this illusion of disenfranchisement and anxiety and frustration, where they're going to claim this corrupt bargain as in 1824, or Trump would stop the steal, and there's really nothing to steal. There was no corrupt bargain in 1824. There was no corrupt bargain in 1804. So this idea of, I'm sorry, not in 1800. There was no bargain. There's no stop the steal. It's when I see these polls that said that Trump is 34% and Vivek is at 12%, blah blah blah, I'm like, you're feeding into this populist demagoguery that it's not wanted. Maybe they do it in Mexico, maybe they do it in the UK or in France, but not here. We're not here to be a populist democracy. Far from it, and it just infuriates me that they're trying to make it, the power of democracy, or we are the voice of democracy. No, we're not. We're the voice of republics, not democracy. And that is also what is the Constitution is not a democratic document. It's a form of republic document. And that also feeds into the media that just makes me upset, that this frenzy of democracy versus the republic, and it's just people don't understand that.
yeah, and you know, people just they want. People want a king, and that's the problem, you know. And like I said at the top, we already have a king. It's the Constitution, and but people want their politicians. They want their politicians there to basically write laws and execute laws in their favor, and really, you know, if the government were operating the way it's supposed to operate, there'd be very little authority to government, and you know, people could actually take ownership of their own lives, and you know, we wouldn't have this anxiety every election cycle. Well, you know, everybody's scared if, you know, everybody who's a Democrat is scared that Donald Trump might win a re-election. And, you know, everybody who's a Republican is scared that Joe Biden might win re-election. And I'm sitting here saying, you know, quite frankly, I don't want either of them in the White House. But I'm not going to live in fear of them. You know, they're going to do what they're going to do. We need to start taking ownership of our own lives and you know, stop propping up these politicians as these all-powerful people. They're not. They're just people. Just, you know, when they're not following the Constitution, don't listen to them. I mean, as you know, as far as I'm concerned, if it's an unconstitutional order, I do not have to obey it. If it's a constitutional order, then yes, I will obey those constitutional orders. And quite frankly, it doesn't seem like there are any constitutional orders anymore. I think they just care about trying to make us do stuff that we don't need to do. Yeah, just stop looking towards the politician and start reading the Constitution. Start reading what America's real king is saying there, and that the government is limited in their authority. That's what the Constitution says. So stop propping up the politicians.
No, you're right. And one last thought: liberals want a premier for life, and conservatives want a caudillo for life, like a Batista or they just want a sense of caudillo or a Pinochet or a Franco, like that. So, you know, we really need to stop that, because, you know, we don't want a premier, we don't want a caudillo. We want just a federal bureaucrat to come in, do his 4 years. If he's worthy of re-election, then he's worthy of re-election. We'll give him another 4 years, and that's it. Go home and you know, do your job that you're supposed to do based on the document that, you know, you have sworn an allegiance. That's why I don't believe that, you know, if they would just swear allegiance to the Constitution on their oath of office on the first day, then maybe it could be something different. But they swore allegiance to a Bible or to the Quran. That, again, that to me is unconstitutional. Because, you know, the First Amendment says that, you know, Congress shall make no law with establishment of religion. They're establishing a religion with the Bible or with the Quran or with the Torah. So, but that's another discussion. But on my final thought of the night is that, you know your rights. That's the most important part. Know all your rights. Know your individual rights. That's based on the Bill of Rights and on the state's rights, state sovereignty. Because the federal government has no rights. They don't. Even though the 16th and 17th are there in the Constitution, I call them the unprincipled amendments, because that's what they are. They're unprincipled. They're constitutional because they're in there, but they're unprincipled because they have no base fact to be there in the first place. But know your first Bill of Rights, and know your individual and state rights, and don't listen to what the media says that we must follow allegiance to a elected king, elected bureaucrat, because as Seth pointed out, the Constitution is king. That's the king we need to follow.
Yeah, and you know, just that's the most important thing, though, is know your rights, read the Constitution. I think it's important to read the whole document. But if you want to start somewhere, start with the Bill of Rights. Like you said, the most important part to you, and then the preamble for me. It gives you a framework of why this document was being written to begin with. You go to the Bill of Rights and read what your rights are, so that you can know them. So when you interact with police, when you interact with bureaucrats, when you just interact with government in general, you know what your rights are, and understand that the government is supposed to be serving you. They're supposed to be the servant. You're the master, they're the servant. We've perverted that, where the government's become master and we've become the servants. We need to switch those roles around, because that's what the Constitution was really laying out, how the government is supposed to serve the public. Know your rights and use your rights, and if you don't use them, you lose them. So just know your rights and use them.
And good point to that. The government was never supposed to be the master, and us the servant. It's the other way around. They are the servants and we are the masters, the citizens. And good point to that. And with that note, know your rights, as Seth and I pointed out. Know your Constitution, and keep on fighting the fight for our individual rights. And with that, have yourself a great night, a great week, and we will touch base next Sunday.
Good night.